e-commerce brand, the thought of working with a fulfillment center or a 3PL can definitely be intimidating. But in today's video, we're going to walk through what are some of the common misconceptions about working with 3PLs and fulfillment centers, what is the reality of those situations, and should you even be working with one? My name's Brennan, and I've owned and operated my own e-commerce brands for the last 10 years. We've been shipping for ourselves, and we started our own 3PL to help service growing other e-commerce brands about 5 years ago called Nitro Logistics. So I've also been on the brand side while helping a bunch of e-commerce brands grow while running their fulfillment. There's definitely a ton of confusion when it comes to fulfillment and what that all entails and all the different things that kind of come along with that. And so my goal with this video is to walk through some of the most common misconceptions that I know I had at first, and I think a lot of people have, and what the true reality of working with a fulfillment center or a 3PL is really like for you as a growing e-commerce brand. So with all that, let's go ahead and dive on in. Now, first up, I think the most common one that I get all the time is, well, my brand's not big enough to work with a 3PL. The reality is there's so many different kinds of 3PLs or fulfillment centers that service different types of clients that even if you're an e-commerce brand that's doing 5, 10, 15 orders a day, it's totally possible that there is a 3PL that is willing to work with you and could still be a good fit. I typically tell people that you need to be doing at least 100 or 200 orders a month minimum to even begin looking at that process. There are so many different kinds of 3PLs that you shouldn't just say, no, it's not gonna work for us because we're not doing enough volume. The main thing when it comes to finding a good 3PL is just making sure you find one that not only fits right now, but is also going to scale with you as your brand grows, because what you don't wanna be doing is having to switch fulfillment centers a year, 2 years in, when the fulfillment center you might have started with could handle your 10, 15 orders a day, but now can they handle when you're doing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 orders a day? Sometimes it ends up being a bit of a different operation. And so I don't think that there are any brands that are necessarily too small for a 3PL, but it's more so about finding the right 3PL. Second off, and honestly, one of my biggest concerns when I looked at this was, well, outsourcing my shipping is gonna be way too expensive. Now, logically, it might seem this way, right? It's a separate business, they have to make money somehow. But the reality of it is, a lot of the times they're gonna have cheaper shipping rates than you because they get all the aggregate volume from all their different customers to then go negotiate with FedEx and UPS and USPS to get lower rates. So in turn, a lot of the times you end up actually getting cheaper rates. Now, there's also a ton of other overhead that I know when I ran the numbers for our own brands initially, I never even considered. Things like you're still paying payroll and all of the overhead of the admin work. You have a lease, you have all of the equipment, the software, the scanning, the iPads, the sourcing and stocking packaging materials. Like, there's so much overhead that might not be assigned an actual number. And a lot of that you just get out of the box with a 3PL. With a 3PL, they're all gonna have their kind of standard pricing, and a lot of it has to do with how many picks are in the order and how heavy it is. But a lot of the time you're not actually paying for their rent or for their admin fees, right? And so there's a lot of these soft costs that add up that I would have never calculated into what the true cost of fulfillment is. And so I think that it's important that A, you do that, but also B, you work and try to find a 3PL that at the end of the day is actually gonna end up saving you money, whether that be in the form of just time or true actual savings. And that actually leads me into our next point, which is you're gonna lose control over your brand. Now, we never even ended up outsourcing to a 3PL. We had talked to a bunch of them, but I can tell you when I speak to brands coming from the 3PL side, it's one of the most common concerns, especially people that started in their garage shipping their own packages, which is a really common origin story for a ton of e-commerce brands is, well, I'm gonna lose control over putting notes in the packages, and I do this for these type of orders and package things this way for these type of orders. And I don't think that that's always the case. Again, it kind of comes back to our first point, which is you need to find the right 3PL. But there are tons of 3PLs out there that are more than willing to work with you, and a lot of them have built process. Like, I know for ourselves, we built process for a ton of customers to be able to keep a certain level of customization that stays true to the brand and who they are, so that their customers don't think, oh, they just outsourced this to a fulfillment center. The reality is your customers are just getting a package in the mail anyways, but it allows them to keep the same level of personalization or customization that they want around their brand and maintaining that image while still working with the 3PL. These are things, anything from custom packaging inserts to custom boxes, maybe it's custom tissue paper. All these kind of small little things that you could easily do on your own might seem impossible when working with a larger, bigger process that a 3PL has to follow, but they're totally doable. You just need to work with your partners or whoever you're in touch with at the 3PL to build that process in. And next up, I think this might actually be the scariest part for most people about working with a 3PL or a fulfillment center, is the thought of these hidden fees. Now, there definitely are 3PLs that will nickel and dime you for things, but this all comes back to, again, choosing the right 3PL for you. Making sure that your pricing agreements are clear up front, and I always recommend to brands thinking about working with a 3PL, give them 30 days of data, 60 days, whatever it is, let them model out what that pricing structure working with them would look like. Then you can go back and either compare it against other 3PLs, because all the 3PLs pricing is so different, or your own in-house fulfillment costs, to just get a true idea of what's the actual cost of working with them, what's that gonna be worth to me, and are these hidden fees gonna show up? One other thing I always recommend for brands thinking about working with a 3PL is go ask them for a couple references. And instead of all those reference calls being like, oh, were they good? Did you like them? Sure, ask those questions, but also be sure to ask, what was the billing experience like? Was there unexpected charges? Were you happy with what you were paying at the end of the month? And I think that those questions tend to be a lot more important than, were you generally happy working with them or whatever? It's just one thing that I think not a lot of people ask about up front. Then they get their first bill, and then they end up in this situation where they're like, wait, why is this way? And finally, another thing that could be considered a myth, but I actually think is a huge advantage, is that 3PLs are too industry specific. And what I mean by that is, if you're a supplement brand, right, you're gonna want to work with a 3PL that probably works with other supplement brands. In our experience, there are so many learnings and tiny little nuanced things that you pick up from working in a certain niche or a certain category. For example, maybe it's a more efficient way to package things, or a certain packaging supplier you order stuff from. There's just usually a lot of mutual learning when shipping a lot of similar types of products, that if you go work with a 3PL that ships for either your competitors or a lot of other similar types of products, they're probably gonna come back to you immediately and be like, hey, here's 10 things we already did when we onboarded, so I would recommend you at least look at these or do these things. And I know for us, it's one of the main things we look at is how can we add value to the process as someone coming to work with us as a 3PL. I'm aware that we've probably shipped a lot more stuff and have a lot better understanding of the ecosystem. And so how are we able to extract the things that we know and improve their fulfillment process, whether that's through cost or just a better overall experience for the customer. But as a 3PL, it's always something we try to bring to the table. And so I think that actually working with industry specific 3PLs is honestly a huge advantage, not necessarily a giant issue, right? That they're not going to be able to do everything under the sun. And I don't think most 3PLs try to do everything under the sun, and the ones that do typically don't end up doing that well, because it's really hard to just do one thing really well, let alone try to do that across 20 different industries. It's just so much nuance to all of it when it comes to shipping. The rules are changing all the time. The carriers are always changing things. And so being able to stay in line and stay in check and make sure you're following best practices is really difficult. And that's, at the end of the day, part of what you are working with a 3PL for and paying them to do. So with all that said, those are definitely the most common kind of misconceptions I hear, or things that people are nervous about when potentially working with a fulfillment center. Like I said, we own and operate our own 3PL. We also own and operate the fulfillment for our own brands. They work with our 3PL. And before we even started the 3PL, we'd been shipping out of our own garage and warehouses and whatnot for the last 10 years. So I've definitely been on both sides of this. Our goal with the 3PL, and the reason it started, was honestly I had friends asking me, hey, I've got this warehouse, can you start shipping our stuff, because you clearly do a good job with your own. And so our 3PL was born out of the goal of trying to help fellow e-commerce owners have an actual good experience and something that they can rely on. And so that's why we exist. So if that is something you are interested in, feel free to check out our website. There should be a link below. You'll probably end up on the phone with me just to talk through some basic stuff, but we're always happy to help you, at least get you a quote, or maybe point you in the right direction if we're not going to be a good fit. But yeah, with all that said, I hope it was helpful. If you have any other questions or anything, feel free to drop a comment below. I will answer it in a future video. I could talk about the shipping stuff all day, so love it. But anyways, until then, happy